Julie Hu with Sirius Dallas Moon. This is Mercury Hour Soul Day. And Mercury is 8 degrees Aquarius. This big stellium in Aquarius is definitely not making it easy time, but it is a very accumulatively revolutionary time. Ascendant is 2 degrees Cancer. Moon just crossed both Chiron and Aries. If everybody's alive right now, then we're pretty much almost past the really deadly aviation cycle. And by tomorrow, Jupiter will exit the 18 degree or the toxic belief degree, whether it's toxic spirituality, toxic religion, spiritual bypassing. Like I said, I think many of the things would be needing to wait until Jupiter is 17 degrees to make kind of like the final judgment once we are out of the really evil use of religion. One of the stories that I ran into was Cain and Abel. All the while, the trust issues, even among the astrology community, led me to wonder if some of my colleagues participating in crimes against humanity, human trafficking, use of occult to traffic people, and that of course creates a breach of trust, particularly in alignment with the spiritual practices to do with both astrology and magic, um, whichever path, okay, left hand or right hand path, children should not be mutilated, organ traded, people should not be trafficked. There's no justification under anything um, for these acts. And as I was running into the story of Cain and Abel to do with the first decan of Aquarius, um, I was for the first time reading the story, understanding that Jehovah did not accept grain, which is associated with the deities of the harvest. For example, Ceres is a deity of the harvest. Spica is a deity of the harvest. Um, Even Saturn, that was considered yin, is, is involved with agriculture. And that god received not grain, but only bloodshed of sheep. And it led to that the one who offered grain to bloodshed his brother. And then that brother was exiled. So this is why people may refer to that as a deacon of exile, according to some writings. And this is showing Jehovah as a god of discord, as just the god that would pit a brother against one another, cause strife and isolation, and then evacuate everybody from the land and encourage bloodshed over the offering of the grain. If God did not want people to eat grain, which by the way can cause inflammation, at least in the modern form of grain, perhaps in the past it didn't, but if God was for like meat-based diet, couldn't he have just like said so? Because he could exile, he could pit one brother against another, he could punish one woman that was exile one woman, Lilith, from heaven, and then punish the other woman that was reconnecting with the snake, which is Kundalini rise, and then punish the snake to never rise. You know what it means, Kundalini to never rise? It basically means that people are consecutively tortured and raped so that they cannot recover from sexual violence. That's in practice what it means to punish the snake or the life energy within people. Um, Basically, the Bible forbade willing consensual sex between two adults. That's what it means. And then pit the brother against one another. And I'm like, my God, that's Genesis. So I found a Baha'i teaching of equality of women and men. I don't know too much about Baha'i, but I was like, hey, definitely that Genesis God is the exact God that people blame for causing false flags, discord, pitting people against one another, genociding one another, human trafficking, drug trafficking, but never sex between two adult, not just consenting, but willingly consenting, God forbid. That would lead to exile, shame, um, albeit the textile use of apple tree leaves or fig tree leaves or whatnot. Um, so for me, that marks Jupiter 18 degrees at its finest. Okay? Evil religion, evil beliefs, the root of evil behind our orthodox beliefs that we're supposed to find refuge in, spiritual alignment with. This is supposed to be our divine connection. And Saturn in Pisces is really doing a magnificent job at unrooting evil from religion. Nobody can follow an evil religion. I don't know. Forget about it now. No religion that justifies human trafficking, child trafficking, ritual abuse has any merit. Religions and cultures have been used to enslave. And it is okay to denounce certain parts of the scripture and refine if it is indeed not a hoax, because the egregores around this religion give very confusing results. Due to that lack of coherence, um, if we come back to the first decan of Aquarius, which Venus has just left, but it comes um, it comes to a place where we could see wealth redistribution, and if our spiritual or religious beliefs don't yield wealth redistribution that is actually allowing for good flow amongst nature and people and so on and so forth, then reconsidering our religion, Saturn in Pisces, ruler of this decan now in Pisces, and the root of evil in our scriptures is inevitable. And I think that um, our religious tolerance and fundamentalism within normalized religion both have been called to basically reassess. Like, even if I think about myself, like I said, I'm 41 years old. That's the first time I run into that story with that description, not because it wasn't there before, but because how many times have I read Genesis? I mean, I'm a secular person. What if I got what if I got to read Genesis over and over again? Um, and I will save you the Google search that brought me to that because it was such a breach of trust. Um, to such a radical extent that involved a cult that and I'm being extremely cautious here because I know that the people who are acting against women, humanity, and so on um, are often tortured, and this is why is the only reason why I don't name that argument as it is, and the fact that I know that there is some real astrological challenges um, involved here, and I use that not to project, but to benefically give something the transit and the timing to resolve itself or to come to clear waters. People can make mistakes, um, and I'm not here to deter anyone from seeing through to what were their mistakes and refine them. Um, I can only set my own boundaries, and in a place where power was used against me, so much so that I couldn't even set the boundary, um, that will that will result in the whatever ecosystemic repercussions that even prevented me from, um, let's say, correcting wrongs or aligning um, and again, I know that whenever people align, usually those things come to the surface. So I'm really wanting to emphasize that Jupiter by tomorrow will leave the 18th degree and readdress the fact that the first decan of Aries, of Aquarius, is indeed associated with terrible wrongs and sometimes the repercussions and and this is where ritual abuse does show up in astrology because the um, the consistency of implications um, is purposefully violated by ritual abuse. In fact, ritual abuse aims at depriving people from um, alignment with what is benefic for them in humanity. And so, okay, the point of ritual abuse is to get people to undermine themselves. And yet, both ritual abuse has accumulating effect, and yet the many infants that were slaughtered as expendable children, and the many people that never got the chance to walk out and were tortured upon, and that in itself can create what people call spiritual bypass, can simply be downright dissociation due to torture. And So all of these planets conjoining on this very decan, um, while Jupiter is still 18 degrees. And again, by tomorrow, we're done with Jupiter in the 18 degrees. And Jupiter ruling over Saturn that rules this decan is very intense and challenging time. There can be people that have faced torture and tried to correct wrongs and are not seen because they're not trusted following what they did when they were tortured. And then there are the people that believe that they are right to torture people, which is, and then there are the people that really don't know what to do or how to set a boundary, trying all kind of different things to set a boundary. Um, so again, ritual abuse, child trafficking, human trafficking, the use of occult to rape, to torture, and to bring misfortune. Um, those things are designed to create cult-like religion, to funnel life energy away from. And if this is considered the law of the land, basically, um, perhaps acknowledging that is reinstating the law of the land. Um, one cannot request a tortured person to correct themselves while they're being tortured, nor can they blame the raped in their rape. Um, okay, crimes against humanity are crimes against humanity, and crimes against humanity are crimes against nature because humanity is a part of nature. Okay? Even our evolution, if we talk about alchemy that preceded chemistry, or modern chemistry that is also alchemical, we are talking about arranging nature and us within it in a way that um, works with nature to create something that we are happy and thriving in. And nature is happy and thriving in. This is the architecture of Aquarius. And perhaps that exile um, has to do with when that architecture is not adaptable, or not, or we're not containing life, and this is because of ritual abuse. Um, torturing people for decades and blaming them for creating the same problems is, how should I say that? Um, this is the essence of ritual abuse. is to rape an infant and then blame that infant for its rape, but that infant can only be redeemed when they become one with the perpetrator and become offender. And deny and blame shift when a boundary is set to that. And those that are a part of torturing them under whatever brotherhood. Okay, if you talk about Cain and Abel's story um, and the exile, it was about brotherhoods. It was about men behaving in those ways to men. And then what happened? Women set the boundary usually. Okay, women said, the Me Too was a women movement. Feminism was a women movement that set the boundary first and foremost to what men to do to men. Under the guise of secrecy and allocating the resources by rites of passages of being raped and raping. And oaths of silence that are decapitation upon breaching the oath that was never, it was like an invalid NDA, because if one is tortured to a ritual, a mantra, saying that they accept or agree or sign or whatnot, that was never valid. What they are not presented with is a choice and access to housing, food, life, without being a part of the torturers. So this Jupiter degree is ruling over Saturn, ruling over the stellium in Aquarius, and particularly in the first decan of Aquarius, is beyond is beyond striking, is beyond intense. Um, and for many of us, the things that have happened before around that decan, or around when things were in Aquarius, show up, and again, the attempt to silence people, the attempt to um, prevent them from speaking up against something that, if it doesn't change, there is no life on Earth. The exile will be of humanity from entire Earth, and not just humanity, but all the ecosystem, everything living. And to those that talk about the creation of the Matrix and the fall from Eden as that creation of the Matrix, that everybody will brought into this perpetual war state, because we cannot not read Genesis in that way. It's kind of like, if we don't read Genesis, we can be like spiritually, religiously tolerant, kind of like live and let live. But then when we actually face what is the law of the land, okay, where's the housing? Where's the heal to our alignment, shadow work? Um, well, being bartered by something. Being bartered by what? Well, let's go back to Genesis. So that's their God. That's So people who act like that God or who play the role of God in that image are basically acting in those ways, and they are the root of evil. So that's interesting. Very misaligned, and explains why there are housing issues in the world. But the good news, again, and let's see when does Jupiter leave 7 degree, 18 degree, because this is indeed intense. Okay, it's maybe 9 hours, not even that, 12 hours. We're 12 hours from now, um, 15 hours. No, 17 hours, 18 hours. It really is a day. It really is a day, 19 hours. For no good news, 20 hours from now. We got 20 more hours in that dumb fuckery. Um, and then, by then, Mars will ingress to the 2nd degree, and I believe Mars will sever a lot of unjust relations, particularly those who have been unjust to women to take land or the accessibility to housing from women, because it's a Venus degree. This is why I say women. But Venus is 11 degrees. The topic of suicide can come to the surface. Those who try to make women suicide to take over their land. Okay, that's some really horrid shit out there. That probably has to do with toxic beliefs. And of course, technology is involved as well, because of course it's an Aquarius sign. The ingress of the moon to Taurus is still intense, and in the coming 2-3 years will be intense because it's squaring Pluto. Um, but this is also the way that communities work to oppress and enslave people. Okay, Pluto in Aquarius is both the power of the community, but also the power of the community to exile itself. For example, okay, with this type of gods supposedly governing the law of the land. Okay, the god that says No, I don't like the grain. Animal slaughter is fine. Was Cain supposed to kill a sheep or kill his brother to satisfy such God, to appease such God? Or was he supposed to kidnap a sheep, to steal a sheep from his brother and appease the God with theft? Do the people that don't have ships not deserve God's appreciation of what they have to give? Like, so that definitely looks like the psychological abuse and religious abuse to take over land by cunningness under the guise of religion or spirituality and installing it as if that is the law of the land. Now, something that comes to clothes and clothing. Um, and here is the thing: in those religions, now there are two things about clothing. One is, are the clothing produced ethically? Okay, is there rape, ritual abuse, exploitation in a production of clothing? And B, the use of clothing that are usually not even organic or well produced or well weaved to shame people that can't afford clothes. And I remind us that during the Second World War, nobody actually had clothing. Okay, so those that try to um, harm women, usually women are the target of that because they don't wear, because they wear pants and not dress, for example. They should remember how they came before their God um, in the concentration camps and the labor camps. Men and women completely naked, humiliated, in the cold. Um, and also remember that it's not just whether we shame people for clothing or not, but also how are clothes produced. Because we still have time before Saturn gets into Taurus, but by the time Saturn gets into Taurus, we may have lack of clothing, like literal lack of clothing. When I was in Netherlands, Saturn was squaring Uranus from Aquarius, and the only thing I had to steal in the beginning, I didn't have to steal anything. Later, I had to steal food, and the only thing I had to steal but food was a glove, because there weren't gloves that were warm enough, and it was kind of cold in the winter. So I stole very simple gloves, and yes, what can I do? So that was an item of clothing that, and I have to admit, the rest was pretty much provided for. Um, but then this lack of gloves is actually interesting, um, because with rape based and ritual abuse based factories, weaving, and even if it is natural or organic clothes, it goes to the kettle, then that can absolutely produce lack of clothing. Just as we have lack of food like dairy and meat, but hey, the meat that is now being produced is produced with a shit ton of hormones, and yet the accessibility to actually nourishing soil and nourishing food is something that requires transition. Um, and the people that don't have access to the best meat sometimes do end up eating, whatever is in store, and that could be, of course, a risk to their health, and also unwanted participation in not the best of conditions for cattle. And one could even prompt the question that not eating meat is leaving that problem, because this cattle is not being tended to, is not being liberated either, nor is it being profoundly replaced by anything other than powder that people cannot even assess if it's real food, or drugs, or something that could even be toxic. Um, and when that, of course, when it happens within the kettle, it's also this lack of connection between the food and the people. So definitely, food shortages can arise um, with that, both Uranus in Taurus, but definitely upon Saturn in Taurus, um, and the torture of people, particularly to make it inaccessible for them to be, let's say, vegetarian or vegan, um, and then um, treating them like cattle as if it is implication of something that anyway they went against. Okay, but perhaps even discovering that our bones suffer when we don't eat, let's say, fish for a prolonged period of time. Like I said, we've been so dissociated from food that we don't actually, and sometimes it's a combination of being exposed to um, those challenges, nourishment that's actually nourishing, and the shortages of food that we may run into or may have run into. Um, so, yeah, and this is where the right to exit violence is. an important topic, the right to exit the cold, the right to exit violence, and the where to. Because if all those exits were trafficking and prevention of alignment and recovery, then it can compound to the destruction of humanity. And whether it should or shouldn't is not even a topic that I question at this point, but the fact that it just does. Um, do people that run a business in United States need to um, target individuals and torture and rape and traffic them to actually make a living? Even though they are competent professional at their field and even world renowned in their field of expertise, like there's something really off here. And we still got 20 hours of this Jupiter in the 18th degree of Cancer. The moon will ingress to Taurus in a couple of hours, I think. Yeah. Again, challenging ingress, the moon will square Pluto from 3 degree Taurus. The moon squaring Pluto from Taurus can have to do with businesses to do with the land or with cattle or with anything Venusian, um, including textile. Okay, the physical expression of Venus, artwork, but mainly the physical, and I think perhaps the question of AI versus not AI. Um, by the way, with the robotification of humans and the humanification of robots, certain things cease being ethical when it comes to human robot interaction because the veil of ignorance is going to be in such a way that we wouldn't know if it's a robot or a human being. And I think that that's kind of important to know in advance because those that wouldn't, how should I say that? We are going to have to treat robots as human and treat them with ethics and grace. And treat humans being mindful of programming of people, which happens by torture. Again, Aquarius, what is human and what is technology with Aquarius blends. And I think astrology is one of the perfect sciences, okay, to show for that. Even architecture, because in a house that is too hot, people can get murderous. Whereas in a house that the energy is in the right temperature and have enough water and so on and so forth, there's a lot more contributing to healthy and balanced nervous system. So this also pertains to jailing people. I think that we cannot deprive people of the conditions to a healthy nervous system, even in jail, because the whole point is rehabilitation. And the basis of these human conditions has to be there so that people can rehabilitate. And if we think about the use of prison as yet another form of, I remember Annika Lucas said that she was thinking she would meet in prison when she did, I think, yoga for prisoners, and she was thinking she would meet the people who trafficked her, but she met survivors of trafficking. Yeah, because I know survivors of trafficking are eligible to diplomatic immunity and so on. Um, but those was basically use of death in concentration camps and labor camps against civilians that were trafficked. Um, Again, I can only say that according to the testimony of people that have been working with prisoners. Um, but we cannot expect a person to rehabilitate when they don't have the conditions to. And to begin with, jail was used as to keep people doing crimes outside of prison to stay out of prison. Um, and again, I'm not saying there's no use in jails. It's just that if we don't provide the human conditions for rehabilitation, um, then this is not it's not filling its function as a jail. Now, if people try to go to jail because outside they don't have good living conditions to that degree, um, that shows of our incompetence as society and susceptibility to invasion and all kinds of troubles. So that's another thing to reconsider with the digitation of prison and so on and so forth. Um, and the use of technology to traffic people rather than to abolish human trafficking altogether. Um, so, of course, the same pertains to hospitals, patient sovereignty, and systems that support patient sovereignty, including the architecture of the hospital itself. And of course, it pertains to cattle. Okay, cattle grown in humane conditions should not be a privilege of the rich. And deprivation of soil causes even the fruits and vegetables um, to not be nourishing enough, or one would need I don't know how many kilograms of apples to have the approximate of nourishment of one apple in healthy, nourished soil without chemtrails and stuff. That can cause people to go towards other type of uh, even animal produce when they cannot find nourishment in vegetation. And going back to the story of Cain and Abel, that puts that question also on humanity, which is an even more tricky question in that regard. Um, but of course, if our cattle is not well nourished, it will also not be nourishing, and the same is true to people. It's, we are not very nourishing as we are today. Um, what's more, the implications. Okay, what are the implications of playing God? And by playing God, I mean not defending oneself against injustice, which is being human. Um, but the use of basically, how should I say that? If people want to play God, they should expect people to be angry with them as they would be angry with the gods. Okay, see, because if let's say I offered um, Jova grain and he was not happy, and I can ask Jova, Jova, am I supposed to eat me? Am I supposed to steal a ship? There's no answer, and I'm like, well, that God is probably for ship people and not for grain people. So I should look for a God that is compatible with me. Now, if you're incredibly offended as a God and want me to appease the God, is like you're gonna have to adjust to something that I can humanly do and that is benefic for me because I'm not supposed to mutilate myself for any God. Whether spiritually, physically, or in terms of my living conditions or anything like that. I'm not supposed to suffer for any God. Um, and so one can play the role of God for themselves, but when they ask to be the God of other people, maybe they expect a certain God people relation that is of a certain origin that they came from, but they should not expect, like, what people are more likely to do is to switch religion to another God. And that can be very that can be very, as you think about a person who comes to try to play God, so I'm going to do that, do that, and do that, and then I was like, okay, God, abolish human trafficking. God, abolish child trafficking. God, abolish ritual abuse. God, you evacuated me from this apartment. Okay, where is my land? Where is something? God, what are you asking me to? You're asking me to do inhumane things. God, do you want me to traffic and rape children? I don't think that this is. I mean, you can be a God over you, but I think I will go with another God. Oh, wait a second. What do you mean I can't go with another God? That's kind of abusive. It's like the husbands that murder their spouse when they want a divorce. So at least you can be and I can be and let each other be. But you cannot deprive me of my resources and see yourself as a god to be appeased. And I think we're beginning to understand the type of practice that I was addressing with that. With that. And this is where one tries to have spiritual power over another and deprive them of resources under that guise. Deprive women from housing, a job that is not trafficking, academic achievements that are not compliant with human trafficking, astrological and magical endeavors that are not partaking in depriving people from their life energy. And at the same time, I do see a lot of correction of wrong. Because even when people play God, they can make mistakes and they can correct these mistakes. Um, so not to harm under the guise of being a God. And not to blame shift it when they are the offender. And at the same time, the right to exit violence needs to be enforced. So that's something that really is important. Because when people try to have power over another person, they are creating within that person an aggressor. When people try to put people in trauma so that they can mind control them, they are creating aggressors. To think that that aggression will never be turned against them is to expect basically entire humanity to collapse into itself. And they are included in that humanity. Trying to collapse a person's spirit over nothing can under no God be justified. And a person who chooses to play God in that particular fashion need not be overwhelmed when he is rejected as a God and as a person.